everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rebecca, otherwise known as Hypnot Hooray Online, and this is podcast episode 13. So I don't have any finished objects to share in this episode, but I do have progress on my whips and a few cast-ons. So I thought, you know what, let's podcast today. And I have a bit of an update, a sad update. I would have been sharing my Ester jacket as my first whip, but I frogged it. So I don't know if I really voiced it that much on the last podcast episode, but I mentioned that I wasn't very excited about this project when I first got back from my trip, and then I started working on it again. And a part of the reason why was, you know how sometimes when you take a break from a project and then you come back to it and you see it in kind of a different light or in a different way? Yeah, so that happened with this Ester jacket, and I was just thinking that the textured knit wasn't really shining very well in this yarn combination. So this is Knit Picks Wool of the Andes and Drops Kid Silk, so a worsted weight 100% wool with mohair. And I was thinking that would be an okay substitution for what is suggested in the pattern, which is Jensen and Tafini, I believe. So a DK weight and a lace weight as well, or very light fingering. And so I thought that the yarn substitution really worked, but I think that this this combination together, the wool and the mohair, just doesn't add enough structure like the sample or what is suggested in the pattern. And so I was worried that the diamond motifs weren't really popping very much, and I figured that after blocking they're going to be even more diffused or just I guess stretched out because of the mohair, but then also with blocking the work grows. And so that's kind of how I felt when I came back to it and I was looking at it, and I just didn't really want to give up on the project because I mentioned that it's such an involved knit, and so much of my time already went into knitting this textured cardigan, and I thought it would be such a shame to give up on it. But I was talking to some of my knitting friends. We met up at a cafe, and I was like, this is how I'm feeling. And they were like, you're either gonna frog it now because you're unhappy with it, or you're gonna frog it later after you finish the whole thing because you never wear it. And I was like, that is a really good point. So I went back home that night and I frogged it right away just to not think about the decision anymore and just do it. And I don't have any regrets doing it. So if there's ever a whip, or if you're kind of going through that right now and there's a whip that you're not super happy with, but you kind of think of the sunk cost of it, how much time you've put into making it, this is to remind you that, you know, a lot of the time with frogging, you're never going to regret it, and it just leaves the yarn in a position to find a better project for it in the future. So yes, this is my update on my Ester jacket. I think I'm still going to do another textured knit cardigan with this yarn, but I'm not going to cast on until the fall, just to see if there's any other new cabled cardigan or textured cardigan designs that come out. But I think that's what I'm going to save for this yarn. Just it's not going to be the Ester jacket. So yes, that's the update on my last whip. But moving on to whips that actually still exist. My first one is the Pie Camisole by Creadia Studio. So the Pie Camisole is a top-down high halter neck camisole knit on 2.5 millimeter needles with a fingering weight yarn. And this is the progress on mine. There are quite a few ends to manage, so I'm just trying to get it in a place where I can hold it up and you can actually see the silhouette of the camisole. I think that's the best it's gonna get for now. So this is the progress that I have so far on the camisole. I think my last podcast episode, I had just joined the front and the back panel in the round. And I've made some progress on it. I've tried to dedicate as much time to this whip as possible. It's also a pretty portable project, and I have lost a little bit of steam, but we're almost there with this camisole. So in terms of progress, I finished knitting the body. I knit to what the length was specified in the pattern for extra small, so hopefully this doesn't come out as cropped as my first version. And then I worked the 1x1 rib for the bottom hem. For that 1x1 rib, I actually worked this ribbing 2 times. And the reason was I didn't size down my needle size for the 1x1 ribbing here because I didn't want it to cinch in too much around my waist and create kind of like a baggy look. Oh my goodness, the needle almost poked my eye. I'm just gonna stick it in the work. Okay, sorry. Yes, so I didn't want it to cinch in too much around my waist, and so I decided to just keep the needle size 2.5mm needle and go straight into the ribbing instead of sizing down to 2mm needles. But what I was noticing the first time I was working the ribbing, similar to how I mentioned with my Esther jacket when I didn't size down for the ribbing, it was looking a little bit messy, and the knit stitches were looking very loose or wide. I think I took a picture before I frogged it. And so I had worked that first, and then I wasn't really happy with how the bottom ribbing was working up, so I ended up ripping it back and then redoing it again. But what I did instead was I noticed the first time around when I knit the 1x1 ribbing, the inside or the wrong side of my ribbing looked a lot neater than the right side, or the one that was showing on the outside of this camisole. And from what I understand, I think it's because sometimes your knit and purl stitches can have different tension, which is why sometimes your ribbing can look a little bit uneven when you work it flat. And so I guess on the inside or wrong side of my work, the purl stitch was a little bit tighter. So that ends up being the knit stitch on the wrong side, but the purl stitch on the outside, that has a little bit of a tighter tension. So that's maybe why it was looking a little bit neater than the knit stitch on the outside. And so what I did was, and I've heard other people do this before, but I hadn't done it before. It's a pretty simple fix. I just, at the first round of working the ribbing, I just worked a German short row and turned my work inside out. So I was basically flipping it. So the what was previously the inside of my work was now the outside of my work. And that ended up creating a lot neater of a ribbing compared to before. Hopefully I have saved that picture, but basically it created a really nice even ribbing. I don't know if you'll be able to tell versus the inside. It's probably a very nominal difference, especially on small needles, but I noticed it and I wasn't happy with it. So I worked the 1x1 ribbing in that way. And then when it was time for the tubular bind off, I just flipped my work back inside out and then worked the bind off. Since I flipped my work, I was able to work essentially backwards on the row, but it appeared to be the right direction or orientation because I flipped my work. I just wanted to make sure that for the tubular bind off, I was binding off from the right side. So I did that for the bottom hem, and I'm really happy with how that turned out. I like how the ribbing looks a lot more. It creates a tighter knit stitch, which worked out because for my armhole ribbing, and I've done one so far, and then I'm working on the second one here. I just started it. And for this armhole ribbing, I did size down to 2mm needles. So since this knit stitch looks tighter, it ends up looking more similar to the 2mm 1x1 rib. So you pick up stitches along the side. This is the front, this is the back. You pick up stitches along the side, and then you're just working flat like this for 1x1 rib. For both of the hems, I knit them 1 centimeter shorter than what's specified in the pattern. I just preferred it. I still wanted a thicker 1x1 rib, but not as thick as what's specified in the pattern, so just 1 centimeter shorter. And then you just do again, Italian bind off or tubular bind off for really neat but stretchy finish. So I'm just doing that for the other side now. And then once I bind that off, the last step to do for this top is to knit the neckband. And that is a really unique construction. You basically pick up stitches along the front, and then you cast on stitches with an Italian cast on to create that really smooth and stretchy finish as well on the cast on edge. It's a little fiddly to work from what I remember. I definitely need to search up a video to remember how to do it, but I feel like I never really noticed it that much because I used black yarn before, so I'm gonna have to pay really close attention to make sure that the cast on ribbing looks good. But you pick up stitches for the side here, and then you pick up along the back, and then you cast on more stitches to complete the, essentially it's like a loop that you're knitting for the neckline, and you knit that loop to the same ribbing length as the sleeves and then the bottom hem, and then you cast off. So the way that you knit the neckline is you're knitting your loop inwards like this, and then you cast off. And so with that, I think it can also be a little bit tricky. I've seen versions of the pie camisole where the neckline is a little bit loose, and I think you just kind of have to, there's a fine balance between knitting it too tight where it will bunch up, but too loose and it will kind of gape out. So it kind of worked out the first time I knit it, and I followed the pattern directions, sized down to 2mm needles. So I don't really have any advice yet on how to make it fit really well and not gape like that. Besides, I guess, what Nabita, the designer, recommends, which is to size down on your needle. But that's just something that I'm gonna be aware of, especially with this yarn, as it's much more delicate, I wanna say, than the merino. That I worked with the first version, so I just have to be careful about that neckline. I might be overcomplicating it, but I've just seen sometimes this pie camisole can look a little bit loose, at least the neckline, on others, so I just want this to be as crisp and neat as possible. So I have that last step to do, and then this will be my first summer knit of 2024, if I can finish that 1x1 ribbing shortly. So that's the progress on my pie camisole. Really happy with it. I say that this could be my first summer knit finished object of this year, but it may not, and that's because I've been making some really good progress on my next WIP, which was a summer knitting plan, and it is my Audrey top, which is a pattern by Petite knit. So the Audrey top is, I keep wanting to say it's top down, but it's not. It's a bottom up camisole that's knit on 4mm needles, and I'm using a DK weight yarn, but the suggested yarn in the pattern is either DK weight or 2 strands of fingering held together. And it's just been such a quick knit because it's on 4mm needles, and it is bottom up, but I was able to do the Judy's Magic cast on, which is an option because the top is stockinette. So I was able to work the front panel and the back panel. I still have the I-cord straps to go. I don't know when I'm going to knit those exactly, if I'm going to finish the body first and then knit them at the very end, or maybe work them and then kind of see the length as I go. I'm not really sure yet, but I still have to work those. Since it's Judy's Magic cast on, you need 2 needles to work the cast on, and you cast on the same number of stitches on the top needle as the bottom needle. Total number of stitches you need for the circumference of the item that you're making. And I always really struggle with Judy's Magic cast on. I like the technique because I like working things middle up to be able to adjust the length later on, mainly because I usually play yarn chicken. Not in this top, but I still wanted to because I kind of also just like getting the more fiddly parts of the top over with first, and then that gives me more flexibility to adjust the length. So that's why I did it for this top, but I always kind of struggle with Judy's Magic cast on because I always struggle with either the first round. It's really fiddly trying to work that first round with 2 needles, because I always find that whenever I try to knit into the top row while the stitches are still on that bottom needle, they always want to slide off of that bottom needle, and then I mess up the cast on. Or whenever I try to slip it onto either a stitch holder or on scrap yarn. It's just a really, really fiddly process until I took advantage of a feature that's always been on my needles and I never use it for. I honestly never really understood why you would do it until I did, and now it's a game changer. So on, I think most popular needle brands, at least ones that I can get here in Canada, like these are my Knit Picks needles, but I know it's the same for Knit Pro, I believe Licca as well, and Knitter's Pride. The cords have a tiny hole on it, not on the needle, but on the cord itself. Hopefully I can show that. But yeah, there's this tiny hole, and I always knew that it was to thread lifelines in, but I always thought that meant it's to thread lifelines in while you're knitting, where you just thread something through that hole, usually like a fine thread, and then you knit that row. And I thought that's kind of always how it worked, but this worked really well for Judy's Magic Cast On. I threaded the reinforcement thread of my Lang Yowl. I always use that for putting stitches on hold, so it's thin enough to thread through there. And then once I thread it through there, then I pull the needle on the other side of the cord, not the side that you just thread the thread through. Hopefully that made sense. Thread the thread. But you pull this needle, and then all your stitches are on a lifeline. And that made it so much easier to just transition my Judy's Magic Cast On stitches onto another thread. Way easier than what I was doing before, which was putting it on a darning needle and then threading them individually like that. So yeah, that may be really obvious to other people, but it was not obvious to me. I had never done that before. So if you're ever struggling with Judy's Magic Cast On or putting stitches on hold, definitely use that feature on your needle if your needles have that, which I think a lot of them do. But that made it really easy for the Judy's Magic Cast On. Yeah, sorry if that was really obvious and repetitive. I don't know if I really needed to share that, but I was very shocked by it. And I would definitely be using that in the future. So once I did the Judy's Magic Cast On, I worked a little bit of the body, just a little bit, and then after that you separate for the front and the back panel. And the front panel and back panel are shaped with decreases along the side. And I decided to do a 3-stitch. No, it was a 2-stitch. It was a 2-stitch edging here. It's not an I-cord, but you just have a 2-stitch border. And the pattern, I think it's 3 stitches, but I didn't want it to look too thick. I thought it looked a little bit bulky, especially on DK weight yarn. So I just did 2 stitches as the edging. And then once you get to the top, you just knit, do a knit bind off. But I mentioned in my summer knitting plans that I wanted to do a picot edge modification, and I was thinking of doing the folded down picot edge, but I wasn't really sure how I would achieve that, because I know with this folded down picot edge you usually want to size down your needle, and the gauge of your folded down picot edge can be a little bit thick if you don't use a thinner weight of yarn for it. So I was trying to figure out how I wanted to do it, and with the yarn that I'm using, I don't think I mentioned it yet, but I'm using Premier Cotton Fair in the shade Cream, which is 52% cotton, 48% acrylic, I believe, yarn. And the yarn is a 5-ply yarn, and it's pretty loosely spun. So if you untwist the yarn like this, you can kind of see the 5 individual plies. And so I thought actually that's quite perfect for this picot edge, since it comes apart pretty easily. So when it was time to do the cast off, I left the 3 stitches here because these are what form your I-cord straps, but then I joined a new strand of the Cotton Fair, but I made it very thin. So I took the Cotton Fair yarn and then I untwisted it, unplied it, I guess. So it was 3 strands instead of 5 strands. So it was unplied when I was working it, but it made the yarn thinner. And I used that to work the picot edge on 2.5mm needles. So I went down 2 needle sizes from 3.5mm needles. I did also size down to 3.5 for this project if I didn't already mention. And then I worked that folded down picot edge. It's really simple to work. I'll link the blog that I follow down below, but for this picot edge, you just have to knit 2 together and then do a yarn over for this one middle round of your folded down edge. And then you work stockinette after that, and then I just cast off in knit stitch and then I seamed it down. So I really like how it looks. I'm really happy that that ended up working out for the hem. I think it's not too bulky compared to the stockinette fabric, so I'm really happy with how that worked out. The only thing is, I think you can kind of tell with me holding it up, but it's kind of folding down. And I'm hoping that this can even out with blocking. I was trying to seam it down 1 row lower so it might sit up straighter, but it's still kind of curling a little bit. So I'm hoping that I can straighten it out. If anyone has any advice on how to make this sit a little bit straighter, that would be much appreciated. So I did that for the front, and then for the back, it's worked in a very similar process to the front. You work those decreases here with that stitch border, with that stockinette stitch border. But the back panel is a little bit longer because you work a section of it just flat here. So it sits higher up at the back. So I finished that, and then because it was kind of folding in a little bit, I decided not to do the picot edge at the back. I figured I won't really see it. I don't know if other people will really notice it with my hair anyways, but I definitely won't really see it. So I decided just to do the regular bind off. In the pattern, you're supposed to cast off in knit stitch, and when I did that, it was curling a lot. So I decided to do a purl stitch bind off. So it's just a simple cast off, but I did it in purl stitch while leaving the 3 stitches on the side to join your I-cord to after and Kitchener stitch. So I have that, and then when I finished those at the front, I just left a really long tail so I don't have to join the work again. So I have them just hanging around. And then I'm going to work those straps, and then now I just have to work the body. So I'm really happy with this modification. I think it looks really nice. I'm just hoping that the folded down picot hem is going to stay flat after I block it. It's nice to be able to switch off between the 2 tanks. For the pie camisole, I'm working on 2mm right now for the ribbing, and then this one on 3.5. It's kind of nice to change between the different needle sizes, so we'll see which one I finish first. And then the next whip that I have to share is the My Honey vest, which good news to share, I didn't end up needing to frog this vest, unlike my Esther jacket, so I'm still working on it, but it is a little bit of a slower progress now, I guess, because I've joined the front panels to the back panels. So the My Honey vest is a little bit of a saga on my podcast. I didn't really intend it to be, I guess. I didn't think it'd be so complicated, but I have been having gauge issues with this vest since the beginning. So I sized up to 3.5mm needles, and I still wasn't achieving gauge. I still had too many stitches for every 10 centimeters compared to the designer. I believe their name is Aline from Wool and Beyond. So the My Honey vest is a top down all over 2-color honeycomb brioche vest that has this horizontal back panel that you pick up stitches on either side, and it's if I didn't already mention, top down. So I had to make quite a few modifications to this vest to make it fit, because even after sizing up, my panels here just were too narrow. They just weren't meeting gauge. And so I mentioned in my last podcast episode, I hadn't joined it in the round yet, but I was working one of the fronts, I believe. And so I ended up needing to add a lot more stitches to the side here by working my increases a lot earlier on both the front 2 panels and then the back panel as well. So I had an additional, I had an additional 24 stitches, but I know that for the vest you have to cast on stitches on the underarm, and I didn't cast on as many as in the pattern. So I will leave all of my detailed stitch counts in my Ravelry notes so you can check it out, so I don't say the wrong thing here and then confuse everybody and myself. But essentially I had to make a lot of modifications to how the vest turned out in sizing, but how it looks as well, because I have more increases here. And I was talking to my friend Yaz, who is also knitting this honey vest, and she was having the same thing as me. She was having pretty bad gauge issues, and she just did a mid-project block, and then she realized that the vest wasn't going to fit. So that was very unfortunate to hear, and she ended up needing to frog the vest. And so after that, I took that as a sign. I was like, actually, I should do the same thing as her and do a mid-project block. So right before I joined the front and the back panels together, I blocked the vest and then I laid it out flat to dry. I didn't pin it into shape or anything. I just wanted to see how it would stretch out naturally. And I was quite concerned because when I took it out of the bath and then I laid it flat on my blocking mat, the vest had grown a lot with blocking, a ton, and so I was worried that my gauge swatch kind of deceived me because it was much bigger than my gauge swatch. It ended up being the gauge of the designer, 16 stitches for every 10 centimeters, which my gauge swatch was not at the very beginning. And so that made me very concerned because then I would have made the vest way too big. I was already sizing up to size medium and then adding more stitches. So the vest would turn out wider, but it would still fit the suggested ease for my size. I would have been knitting a size small. So yeah, I was very, very concerned, but I don't know what it is. Maybe because it's Plutolopi, like because it's unspun yarn, it's pretty lofty and doesn't have that much weight to it. The vest almost like sprung back, I guess, as it dried, and it ended up being shorter and smaller than what it was when I first took it out of the bath. So that was kind of a relief. I still had to make the modifications to the top, but the modifications were not unnecessary. So it ended up working out. The vest shrunk back to what my gauge swatch measurements were, and I ended up casting on a few less stitches for the underarm. I still cast on stitches, but you only need to cast on in multiples of 3, so I just did a few less there for the cast on for the underarms, but now I am just working the body flat, and I am hoping that the vest is going to end up fitting. So yeah, I'm happy that the modifications kind of paid off. Even though I had no idea what I was doing when I was knitting it. I'm happy that they kind of worked out, but I'm having a lot of trouble with this pattern, and it's really unfortunate because I really like Wool and Beyond designs. I think she's very talented and her designs are really unique. I would knit a lot of them, and I have a lot of her patterns because I have purchased quite a few of them over the years, but this is the first one that I've actually knit. So it is a little bit unfortunate because I do like her designs, but I'm having a lot of trouble with this pattern, her pattern writing. The gauge aside, like I know that gauge is a very personal thing, and so me not being able to meet her gauge is more of a my issue, but my friend Yaz was also having gauge issues and fit issues, and she doesn't really specify what the suggested ease or how the vest should fit either, so you kind of have to figure that out for yourself in addition to the gauge challenges you may be experiencing. I've noticed some mistakes in the pattern, which I pointed out in my Ravelry notes. I find that sometimes her instructions can be a little bit confusing unless I reference the videos that she has. So yeah, I know that this also is a top or a pattern that has a more complicated construction, like the brioche and then the back panel as well. So it could just be like this is a more complicated design. And I'm still gonna knit other patterns from her because I already own them in my pattern library, and they seem to be a little bit more simple, like the thin set, or I have the big burrito cardigan, which I really want to knit, but I'm a little bit disappointed with the pattern, to be honest, at the moment. It's worked out for me right now, I think. That may come to bite me later and it actually doesn't fit once I finish it. So far it's working out, but that's after I've done a lot of modifications and thought a lot about this vest. And when I knit a lot of projects, I kind of want it to be mindless, relaxing, and not stress over this, because this hobby for me is meant to be very relaxing. So yeah, I've just been a little bit disappointed with the pattern itself, but I'm really liking how my vest is working up now that I've had the reassurance of my blocking. So I'm hoping that with this vest, I am just going to finish this little nub I have left of the background color of my brioche, and then maybe once I finish that, I will do the armhole edging just to see how the vest, I guess, like cinches in a little bit after working those armholes. But then to do the edging along the neckline, and then for the front here, you have to finish the whole body essentially. So I can't do that till the very end, but at least I can do the armholes first to get a better idea of how this top is actually going to fit. It does look a little bit narrow right now when I wear it on top of a shirt like this, but I'm hoping that the armhole edging will also add some width. So I just kind of want to get a better sense of that. So I'll probably do that after this, and maybe the next time I podcast, I'll have that as well to share as an update. But I just have a lot of the 2-color honeycomb brioche to work. Just a lot, but it's really nice. It's very relaxing now that I don't have to keep track of the increases and I'm just working it flat. So some progress on my vest. And my last whip that I have to share is also a new cast on from my summer knitting plans with stash yarn video. It was also something that I said that I wanted to knit at the beginning of this year, and it is my Jenny jacket v-neck. So I cast this on yesterday and I made more progress than I thought on it. I finished the short rows for the back panel because it's really fun to work up, and it's kind of a potato chip kind of project where I just want to get to the next smock stitch. So I'm very pleased with it so far. So this is the Jenny jacket v-neck, which is a top-down all-over texture smock stitch cardigan knit on 4mm needles. And the yarn that I'm using is the first time I'm using Knit Picks palette, which I'm really enjoying how it's knitting up so far. It kind of feels like Knit Picks Wool of the Andes, just in fingering weight form. It's a different ply as well, but it feels very similar. So yeah, Knit Picks palette in the shade Finley Heather, and I'm holding it together also with a Knit Picks yarn, Knit Picks Aloft in the shade Plover. Really liking this combination. This yarn is a little bit more rustic, I would say. It's still next to skin soft. It does have a tiny bit of a prickle, but the Aloft is super soft, and it has a really dense, I guess, halo on it compared to other mohairs that I've worked with. I really like Knit Picks Aloft, so that really softens up the palette nicely, and I think it pairs really nicely together. Doing the same or very similar combination to Petite knit. I'm not using the same yarn that she did, but it's a light gray. And I knit the back panel, and you cast on stitches, and then you shape the back to create that slanted shoulder with short rows. And that's definitely my preferred construction method for whenever I am working a drop shoulder design. I don't really like the slanted shoulder or shaping the slanted shoulder with increases like in my Esther jacket, and also which I frogged my sweater number 18. Whenever I've done a drop shoulder construction in that way, where I'm shaping the back with increases rather than short rows, it just doesn't fit very comfortably around my shoulders. I don't know if it's because of my body shape or proportions, and that's why I don't like that fit, or maybe others feel the same, but with the increases, it always feels very tight along the shoulder. But then the drop shoulder is really baggy, so I don't really like that construction. I much prefer the short rows. And I was a little bit intimidated by working these short rows because of the smock stitch pattern, but the smock stitch pattern is pretty easy to work up. It's just essentially 2x2 rib, and then you work that smock gathering every 6 rounds. So it's pretty easy to keep track of for the short rows. I didn't have nearly as much trouble as I thought while working it. I was even knitting this while watching TV, so it really wasn't that complicated. I don't know why I was so intimidated, but I ended up finishing the short rows. I am still using markers to keep track of when I should do the smock stitch, at least at the beginning, because I am still trying to understand how to count your rows to know when to do the next smock stitch. So because I've marked them here, I can kind of use that as a reference as I continue to work. But I think I got it figured out, especially because this is worked flat. It's really easy to just know which row you're on and when to start the smock stitch. So yeah, it's working out really nicely so far. Since I finished the short rows, I am gonna work that this back panel just flat now. So really nice. Easy knitting. It's just a little bit time consuming. I really do like this smock stitch now. I'm still trying to get used to how much to tighten the smock gathering here. So the way that the smock stitch works, on the round where you're supposed to do the smock gathering, you put your needle through a few stitches forward, and then you draw up a loop, you put it on your needle, and then you knit that loop with the next stitch to cinch or gather the stitches together. And so in the video by Kimmy Monkholm, who does tutorials for Petite Knit, she mentions, at least in the English translation when I was reading it, that you kind of pull that stitch a little bit tight, but I don't really know how tight you're supposed to pull it to get that gathered stitch. So I've been pulling it like quite tightly, honestly, and I don't know if really that's how you're supposed to do it. It's worked out so far now, but tensioning, I'm hoping I can keep consistent throughout the whole jacket, so we'll see. I am probably just overthinking this, as I do with a lot of my knitting projects, and how tightly you pull that gathering doesn't really matter. I want this jacket to be perfect, exactly how I'm envisioning it in my head, because I just know it's a really time-consuming piece, and I know it's going to be one of those heirloom pieces that I'm just going to keep forever and ever in my knit wardrobe no matter what. So yeah, I just want it to turn out really nicely. This is also part of a knit along that I'm doing with my knitting friends, the January Cal. And so this was a knit along that we started at the beginning of the year. It's July and I just cast it on. So I have a lot of knitting to do to catch up with my friends who are also working, not the Jenny Jacket V-neck, but other Jenny designs from Petite Knit. So I have a lot of catching up to do, and I'm hoping that I can make a decent amount of progress on this knit and just pick it up and work on it as a cleanser project, I guess, in between some of the finer gauge tanks and smaller accessories that I'm working. Just something nice to have on the needles. So yes, the beginning of my Jenny jacket. Let's see how many months this will take me. That is the end of this podcast episode, a little bit of a shorter one. I don't have any acquisitions this podcast episode, and I don't really have that many plans to share. I posted my summer knitting plans with stash yarn video, so that's kind of my planning for the next few months, and I have 2 cast-ons from there, so I'm not planning to cast on anything new until I finish one of these tanks, and I think my next one might be the Technicolor purse. We'll see. I have my zippers. Actually, I have them here. I have various sizes of zippers. So I pulled them out this morning because I'm going to pull out the stash yarn that I was thinking of using and seeing which one will work well for that project. So that's probably going to be my next plan, but I'm not going to formally cast that on until I finish one of these tanks. So we'll see whenever that is. I don't know if it'll be in time for the next episode whenever I get around to filming that, but yeah, I guess that could be the one plan that I have to share. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much if you reached this point in the video. I will keep knitting along on some of these projects, and hopefully a finished object will come soon. I am definitely more of a product knitter, so I'm really hoping to get one of those tanks done. And until I see you in my next video, happy knitting.